A king patrols his orchard with more vigilance than his vault of gold coins. Why would a medieval ruler value a simple fruit tree over a treasure chest of gleaming metal? The answer unlocks a forgotten world where true wealth was alive and growing. By the end of this journey, you will understand how these orchards shaped economies, saved lives, and held a power gold simply could not possess. We will uncover why stealing a single apple could cost a thief their hand, and how the secret art of grafting was guarded like a state secret. What does it truly mean for something to be valuable? That king guarding his orchard was walking in the footsteps of Roman generals. Long before castles dotted the landscape, the Roman Empire was planting apples along its vast network of roads. They brought cultivated apple varieties north from the forests of Kazakhstan, grafting and refining them in orderly orchards that were a hallmark of Roman civilization. When the empire crumbled, this delicate horticultural knowledge nearly vanished into the chaos of the Dark Ages, but a new kind of fortress arose to protect it, one built not of stone, but of faith and solitude. Monasteries became the unexpected arks for this precious botanical legacy. Behind their high walls, monks meticulously copied ancient Roman texts on agriculture, preserving secrets that the outside world had forgotten. Their cloistered gardens were far more than just sources of food. They were the first sophisticated, scientifically managed orchards of the medieval world. Think of each monastery as a living library. Instead of shelves of books, they had rows of trees. Each variety was a unique volume of genetic information, a specific combination of flavor, hardiness, and harvest time that the monks carefully documented and protected. This was a sacred duty. A monk might spend his entire life tending a single ancient tree that had been propagated from a cutting his order brought from Rome centuries prior. They practiced the art of grafting with a reverence usually reserved for prayer, splicing a branch from a tree that produced sweet, juicy fruit onto the hardy rootstock of a wild apple. This was how they safeguarded specific varieties, ensuring that a unique taste or a tree resistant to a local blight would not be lost to time. Without these secluded gardens and the quiet, dedicated work of the monks, entire lineages of apples would have simply disappeared from the earth. They were the guardians of a living treasure, and their success set the stage for an even greater transformation. But the value of these apples extended far beyond the monastery walls and into the very survival of medieval communities. In a world without modern medicine or sanitation, the humble apple was a genuine superfood. It was a vital source of vitamins, especially during the long, bleak winters when fresh greens were a distant memory. Dried apples pressed into leathery sheets provided sustenance on long journeys or in besieged castles, yet its most profound role was not as a solid food, but as a liquid one. In an age where rivers and wells were often dangerously contaminated, finding something safe to drink was a daily gamble. Water could carry dysentery, cholera, and a host of other deadly ailments. What was the alternative? The answer was fermented apple cider. The process of turning apple juice into hard cider created an alcoholic beverage that was, for all practical purposes, sterile. The fermentation process killed the harmful pathogens found in water, making cider a safe, reliable, and long-lasting drink for everyone from peasants to lords. Can you picture the immense relief of having a barrel of this life-saving liquid in your cellar? An entire village's health could literally depend on the success of its local orchard. The trees were not merely producing fruit, they were producing liquid security. This is why a well-managed orchard was a direct contributor to a community's resilience. It was a living pharmacy and a purifier, its roots drawing up not just water, but safety from the very earth, and this essential life-sustaining role only added to the orchard's almost mythical status, making its most prized possessions worth a king's ransom. This liquid security became the foundation of entire regional economies. While a gold coin could be spent only once, a thriving orchard produced a new harvest every single year, creating a river of renewable wealth. In places like Normandy and Asturias, this was not just a cottage industry, it was the engine of power. Here, noble families were not just lords of the land, they were cider barons. Their status was measured not in chests of treasure, but in the number of barrels aging in their cellars and the extent of the orchards that supplied them. The process from tree to tankard was a meticulously managed operation. In the autumn, the harvest was a community-wide effort, with apples carefully sorted by variety, some for eating fresh, but the vast majority destined for the cider press. The crushed pomace was pressed and the juice was channeled into vast wooden barrels to ferment through the winter. By spring, the result was a crisp, alcoholic cider that could be stored for years, traded across continents, and sold in taverns from London to Lisbon. A single prosperous orchard could supply a local tavern for an entire season, with the owner paying the landowner a steady stream of silver for the privilege. This was a continuous, predictable income that a one-time lump sum of gold could never match. It funded castles, raised armies, and forged political alliances. The true treasure was not a static hoard of metal, but the living, breathing fruit-bearing trees that guaranteed a future. This river of cider and bushels of fruit did more than just fill cellars. They fueled the entire feudal economy as a living currency. While gold coins gathered dust in a lord's strongbox, apples and cider were constantly in motion, used to pay for nearly everything. A peasant's annual rent to his lord was not a sum of money he rarely saw, but a specific number of bushels of apples from his own small orchard. The church demanded its tithe, its 10% share of the year's production, which was often collected as barrels of cider delivered directly to the monastery gates. Even a skilled blacksmith might accept payment for mending a plow in the form of several gallons of fresh cider. This was an economy built on tangible, useful goods. Gold was spectacularly useless for these daily transactions. You could not eat a gold coin, you could not drink it to quench your thirst. It held abstract value, but in a world where survival was the primary concern, the practical value of food and safe drink was infinitely higher. A hoard of gold was inert, a symbol of stagnant power, but a storehouse filled with apples represented active, circulating wealth. It could feed a family, be traded for grain, or be transformed into a valuable commodity that could be sent to market. The true measure of a person's wealth was not the metal they locked away, but the productive capacity of their land. An orchard was a mint that printed a new, edible currency with every autumn harvest. This system created a deeply resilient local economy, one that functioned perfectly well even when coins were scarce. It bound communities together in a web of mutual obligation and tangible exchange, where the value of your work was quite literally the fruit of your labor. Yet this tangible wealth was mirrored by a power that could not be measured in barrels or bushels. The apple carried a profound spiritual weight, transforming an orchard from a simple farm into a sacred grove. In the medieval Christian world, the apple was forever linked to the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden. Though the original text merely mentioned a fruit, artistic tradition and popular belief solidified it as the apple, a symbol of both ultimate temptation and the dawn of human knowledge. This duality meant that every orchard tree was a living reminder of that primordial story, a testament to the immense power that a single piece of fruit could hold. But this symbolism ran even deeper into the soil of pre-Christian Europe. In Norse mythology, golden apples were the source of the gods' immortality. In Celtic traditions, apples were associated with the otherworld, a realm of eternal youth and magic. An orchard, therefore, was not just a collection of trees. It was a place where heaven and earth met, a fragment of paradise carefully cultivated by human hands. This spiritual significance elevated the orchard's value far beyond its physical yield. To steal an apple was not merely a theft of food, it was a violation of the sacred. This is why the punishment for such a crime could be so severe, like losing a hand. You were not just stealing a commodity, you were trespassing on hallowed ground and challenging a divine order. A lord walking through his trees was not just a landowner assessing his crop, he was a guardian of a living scripture, a keeper of mysteries that gave his worldly power a celestial endorsement. The rustling leaves whispered of ancient tales, and the fruit itself glowed with a meaning that made its material worth seem almost secondary. That sacred grove was also a living pharmacy. In an age before modern drugs, the apple was a cornerstone of the medieval medical chest, prescribed by physicians and monks for a startling range of ailments. They believed its properties could balance the body's humors, and different varieties were selected with the precision of a modern pharmacist. A sour, astringent crabapple might be used to treat digestive troubles, while a sweet, ripe dessert apple was thought to ease a fever. But the most remarkable healing power came from a substance hidden within the fruit itself, pectin. When a knight suffered a deep sword cut, a poultice made from mashed apple pulp was often applied to the wound. We now know that pectin has natural gelling and antibacterial properties. It would help staunch the bleeding, form a protective seal over the injury, and fight off infection, dramatically improving the chances of survival. This was not mere folk magic. It was an early, effective form of wound care derived directly from the orchard. This practical healing art was deeply intertwined with the era's grandest scientific pursuit, alchemy. The alchemist's ultimate dream was not just to turn lead into gold, but to discover the elixir of life, a potion that could grant immortality and perfect health. For many, the quest for this mythical substance began not in a smoky laboratory, but in the orchard. They saw the apple tree as a natural alchemical vessel. It drew base elements from the earth and transformed them through sunlight and rain into a perfect, luminous fruit. This process of transmutation was the very essence of their art. The endless experimentation with grafting was driven by this alchemical mindset. By splicing branches and creating new varieties, these early horticulturalists were trying to perfect nature itself. They were searching for the ultimate apple, a fruit with such potent life force that it could heal all diseases and extend a person's years. Every new blossom was a potential breakthrough, a step closer to unlocking the secret of life that was hidden within the tree's very genetic code. The orchard was their laboratory, and each harvest brought them closer to a truth they believed was written not in ancient texts, but in the patterns of leaf and bark. This secret art of grafting was the ultimate source of the orchard's power. It was a technology more closely guarded than any castle's architectural plans, a form of intellectual property that could make or break a noble house. The ability to take a branch from a tree that produced the sweetest, most resilient fruit and fuse it onto the hardy roots of a wild sapling was nothing short of magic. This was how specific varieties were preserved and propagated, ensuring that a perfect balance of flavor, texture, and shelf life would continue for generations. The knowledge of which rootstock to use, the precise angle of the cut, the timing of the splice, and the blend of wax and cloth used to bind the wound was a sacred craft. It was passed down from master grafter to a single trusted apprentice, often within a family line. To possess this knowledge was to hold the keys to the kingdom's food security and economic fortune. A master grafter was not a simple laborer. He was a revered figure, a technological wizard whose services were worth a fortune. Lords would pay him in silver, grant him land, and offer him protection, all for the promise of a new orchard filled with trees that bore his expertly crafted fruit. His mind was a living library of botanical secrets, and his hands held a power that no sword could ever match. He could walk into a failing orchard and, within a season, transform it into a thriving source of wealth. Can you comprehend the social standing of such a person? In a world of knights and lords, the humble grafter held a quiet, immense authority. He was the architect of the living currency that fueled everything. A lost grafting technique could mean the extinction of a beloved apple variety, and with it a portion of the community's resilience and identity. This is why the secrets were so fiercely protected, whispered only in the quiet solitude of the orchard, far from eavesdroppers. The future of entire regions literally grew from the careful, secret work of these masters of the blade and the bud. A king's orchard was a fortress ringed not by stone walls, but by the force of law. The punishment for stealing a single apple could be far more brutal than for pocketing a merchant's purse of silver. In medieval England, the legal concept of Hegebrecht specifically dealt with the crime of breaking into a protected garden or orchard, and the penalties were severe. A convicted thief might lose an ear, a hand, or even face execution for repeatedly plundering fruit trees. This was not an overreaction. It was a clear-eyed assessment of national security. Stealing a bag of coins was a temporary loss, but damaging a tree or stealing its signed wood was an attack on future harvests, a blow to the community's long-term survival. Royal decrees enshrined this logic. Consider the laws of Charlemagne, the great Frankish emperor. His famous Capitulaire de Villiers, a detailed decree on managing royal estates, did not merely suggest that orchards be planted. It commanded it, listing specific fruits and herbs that must be cultivated. His successor, Louis the Pious, went even further, issuing edicts that explicitly protected fruit trees from theft and destruction, imposing heavy fines that were multiples of those for other forms of property damage. These were not just agricultural guidelines, they were early forms of critical infrastructure protection. An orchard was legally recognized as a vital state asset, as crucial as a granary or an armory. To harm a tree was to undermine the kingdom's food supply, its economic stability, and the health of its people. This legal armor elevated the orchard keeper to a warden of the peace. His duty was not just to prune and harvest, but to stand guard over the living, breathing wealth of the realm, a sentry against a threat that could starve a village not today, but for years to come. That legal armor required a special kind of soldier to enforce it, not a knight in shining metal, but the orchard keeper. This figure, known in Latin as the primarius, was the master of the living fortress. His hands were not soft from counting coins, but calloused and stained from soil and sap. His work was a constant, year-round cycle of vigilance and skill that sustained the entire operation. In the deep quiet of winter, his breath fogging the air, he would move through the sleeping trees, pruning each branch with surgical precision. This was not random cutting. He was shaping the tree's very skeleton, directing its energy to ensure a bountiful harvest and preventing disease from taking hold in crowded limbs. When spring arrived, his most critical task began, the secret art of grafting. With a steady hand and a sharp knife, he would perform what looked like a miracle, splicing a sliver of wood from a prized tree onto a common rootstock, binding the wound with wax and cloth. This single act could determine the economic future of the estate for the next 50 years. He was not just a laborer, he was a biological architect, building the very source of the kingdom's wealth, one delicate union at a time. His duties extended to a constant war against pests and blight. He would brew pungent herbal concoctions to ward off insects, and he knew the exact moment to harvest each variety, judging by the color of the seeds and the firmness of the flesh. A day too early or too late could mean the difference between a barrel of fine cider and a barrel of vinegar. Can you comprehend the weight of that responsibility? The primarius did not simply grow apples. He managed a complex living system that was the foundation of health, economy, and law. He was the quiet warrior who stood between a community and starvation, his expertise woven into the very fabric of daily survival. The primarius' careful work cultivated a world of flavor we can barely comprehend today. Walk through a medieval orchard and you would not find a few familiar types, but a living tapestry of hundreds, even thousands, of distinct apple varieties. Each tree was a unique tool, a specialized vessel bred for a singular purpose in a world without refrigeration or global supply chains. Some apples were never meant to be eaten straight from the branch. The costard, a large, lumpy, and distinctly ugly fruit, was the undisputed king of the kitchen. Its coarse, acidic flesh was terrible raw, but when heated, it broke down into a perfect, fluffy pulp. This was the essential thickening agent for medieval pottage and apple sauces, the backbone of countless meals. Then there were the storage apples like the legendary Desio, a small, hard, and intensely tart variety. Harvested in October and carefully layered in straw in a cool, dark cellar, the Desio could last until the following May or even June. Its value was not an immediate pleasure, but in its stubborn refusal to rot, providing a vital source of fruit and vitamin C through the dead of winter. And for the cider maker, the palate was even more complex. He sought out specific bittersweet and bittersharp varieties, apples with high tannin content that gave the finished drink structure, complexity, and a long shelf life. These trees had names like foxwhelp and redstreak, their fruits often too astringent for fresh eating, but absolutely priceless when transformed into liquid gold. Can you taste the difference? This was not a monoculture. It was a symphony of flavors and functions, a biological insurance policy where the loss of one variety to a storm or blight did not mean the loss of the entire harvest. The medieval orchard was a library of taste, and every single book was a living tree. That symphony of taste would fall silent without a way to capture its melody for the long, dark months ahead. The true test of an orchard's value was not the autumn harvest, but the ability to make that bounty last until spring. This was a fight against rot and starvation, and the methods they developed were ingenious. One of the most vital was the simple art of drying. Slices of apple were laid out on racks in the sun or placed in the warm air near a bread oven, slowly transforming into chewy, leathery sheets. These dried apples were compact, lightweight, and incredibly durable. They became a concentrated source of energy and vitamins that could be stored in sacks for years. a crucial reserve for a besieged castle or a family facing a failed grain harvest. Another common sight in a medieval storeroom was a string of apples, carefully threaded through their stems and hung from the rafters. This method, called striding, allowed air to circulate around each fruit, dramatically slowing decay. It was like turning the ceiling into a living pantry, a gallery of slowly mellowing fruit that could be plucked one by one throughout the winter. But preservation was not just about keeping the fruit intact, it was about transforming it into something new and equally valuable. Apples that were too bruised or small for storage were pressed into service in the kitchen. A sharp, unripe apple could be crushed to make verjuice, the essential souring agent of medieval cuisine. This tart liquid was used like we use lemon juice or vinegar today, adding a bright, acidic punch to sauces, stews, and marinades. Nothing was wasted. A surplus of ripe apples would be slowly cooked down for hours with spices into a thick, sweet spread known as apple butter. This process caramelized the sugars, creating a preserve that was impervious to spoilage and packed with calories. A single jar of apple butter represented the essence of dozens of apples, a potent concentration of the orchard's energy. Can you see the profound security this provided? A well-stocked larder filled with these preserved goods was a form of biological wealth storage far more reliable than a chest of coins. Gold could not fill an empty stomach in February, but a string of apples or a crock of apple butter could. This was the orchard's final and perhaps most crucial miracle, turning the fleeting abundance of autumn into a lifeline that stretched across the entire year. That same liquid gold that filled the Lord's coffers also flowed into the heart of the village, into the cider cellar. This was far more than a storage room. It was the community's living room, its newsroom, and its boardroom, all rolled into one. On any given evening, the air in the cellar would be thick with the earthy, sweet, sour scent of fermenting apples and the low hum of conversation. The tavern keeper, acting as both host and banker of goodwill, would draw cider from a great barrel, serving it in wooden tankards to every rank of society. A farmer just finished with his plowing would sit on a rough-hewn bench next to a traveling merchant, their thirst a great equalizer. Here, the year's harvest was not just measured, it was tasted and judged. A good batch of cider meant a happy, healthy winter, and the mood in the room would be light. A poor batch cast a shadow of worry, a shared concern that bound everyone together in a common fate. This was where a farmer might learn from his neighbor about a new grafting technique that yielded more fruit, or where a marriage might be arranged between two local families, sealed not with a formal document, but with a shared drink. The cider cellar was the social glue of the village. It was the one place where the rigid lines of the feudal system softened, if only for an hour, over the communal comfort of a safe, reliable drink. The deals struck here, the news exchanged, and the friendships forged were the invisible infrastructure that held the community together, making it resilient not just to disease, but to isolation and despair. The orchard's true value was not just in the fruit it bore, but in the community it built, one shared tankard at a time. That same communal cider cellar could also be the stage for decisions that shaped kingdoms. The value of a thriving orchard was so immense, so undeniable, that it became a currency for kings. In the grand chessboard of medieval politics, a deed to a prized apple grove was a move as powerful as offering a castle or a tract of land. When a war ended, the victor's demands often included the transfer of specific renowned orchards. Seizing these living assets was not mere plunder, it was a strategic maneuver to cripple an enemy's economy while enriching your own. You were not just taking their gold, you were absorbing their means of producing wealth for generations to come. This was a recognized form of power transfer, as legitimate and binding as any treaty signed over a map. The ultimate peace offering, however, was an orchard given willingly. A powerful duke seeking to end a bloody border conflict might formally grant his rival a celebrated orchard known for its exquisite cider apples. This was a gift that spoke a universal language of health, security, and continuous income. It was a promise of future stability, written not on parchment, but in the very soil. Can you comprehend the weight of such a diplomatic gesture? You were not just giving away land, you were handing over a functioning economic engine. But the most personal of these high-stakes transactions was the dowry. When a noblewoman married, her value and the future security of her new household were quantified in part by the productive capacity of the land she brought with her. A marriage contract might specify that she enter the union with the rights to the famous pearmain orchards of her father's estate. Those trees guaranteed her a personal income, independent of her husband's fortunes, and provided her new family with an instant, renewable source of prestige and power. A king's daughter might be sent to a foreign court with a dowry that included the carefully guarded signed wood of a unique apple variety, a living heirloom that would cement an alliance for a century. To offer an orchard was to offer life itself, making it the most eloquent and trusted form of diplomacy in a world where a handshake was sealed by the shared understanding of what it truly meant to be rich. This cultural power was not kept secret, but was proudly woven into the very fabric of medieval identity. Walk through the great hall of a castle, and you would find apples immortalized in threads of silk and wool. In the intricate scenes of tapestries like the Hunt of the Unicorn, the apple tree is not mere background scenery. It is a central symbol of an enclosed, perfect paradise, a representation of the noble family's cultivated and abundant domain. These were not just decorations, they were massive, expensive statements of wealth and control over nature itself. The same message was painted in miniature within the glowing pages of illuminated manuscripts. In the margins of prayer books and psalters, artists often depicted monks gathering apples in idyllic orchards, a direct visual link between spiritual devotion, agricultural knowledge, and the divine blessing of a plentiful harvest. But the most permanent and public declaration of this value was heraldry. A golden apple, or a tree laden with fruit, was a powerful and deliberate choice for a family's coat of arms. This was a language everyone could understand. A knight bearing an apple on his shield was not advertising that he enjoyed a good snack. He was proclaiming that his lineage was rooted in fertile land and renewable wealth. He was telling the world that his house was built not on plundered treasure, but on the enduring, life-giving power of the orchard. Can you see the genius of this symbol? Gold coins could be spent and mines could be exhausted, but an apple tree promised perpetual renewal. A lord sealing a document with a wax stamp bearing an apple was imprinting his commitment to that future, stating that his legacy would be measured in harvests, not in coins. These artistic choices permanently etched the apple's status into the cultural record, transforming a fruit into an emblem of dynasty, a promise from one generation to the next that their power would forever be in bloom. Yet this entire world of living currency was terrifyingly fragile. A single blight could sweep through an orchard, turning leaves black and causing the fruit to shrivel on the branch. A late spring frost could kill every fragile blossom in a single, silent night. When the harvest failed, the consequences were not merely a season of hunger, but a systemic collapse. The river of cider that funded the Lord's household and paid the blacksmith's wages would simply dry up. The stored apples that were supposed to last the winter would be gone by Christmas. This was not just a food shortage, it was the medieval equivalent of a bank run. The entire local economy, built on the promise of the next harvest, would seize up. The Lord's authority, so dependent on his role as the provider of security and sustenance, would crumble. Peasants who could not pay their rent in apples would be thrown into debt or off their land, creating a class of desperate, wandering poor. The village cider cellar, once a hub of community, would become a place of bitter silence and shared fear. A lord facing a failed orchard was not just a landowner with a bad year, he was a king whose mint had suddenly and catastrophically shut down. His power to command, to tax, and to protect evaporated with the dying trees. Famine would stalk the land, but it would be followed by something even more dangerous to the ruling class, the cold wind of social unrest and the terrifying realization that their wealth had never been in their vaults, but in the vulnerable, living wood of the orchard. But the apple tree offered far more than just its precious fruit. Every part of this remarkable plant was a valuable resource, a complete biological factory working year-round. The wood of the apple tree was not used for common firewood. That would have been a terrible waste. Instead, its fine, dense grain made it the material of choice for master craftsmen. A carpenter would seek out seasoned apple wood to carve into intricate gears for clocks, the delicate handles of fine knives, and the smooth, polished bodies of musical instruments. Its strength and resistance to splitting made it perfect for the handles of hammers and axes, tools that had to withstand years of brutal impact. An old, unproductive tree was not cut down and forgotten. It was carefully harvested, its timber yielding a final, lasting wealth long after its fruiting days were done. Can you feel the smooth, polished wood of a tool handle, shaped by generations of hands, all from a tree that once fed a family. Even the delicate blossoms, so beautiful in the spring, had a vital purpose. Gathered before they fully opened, these pale pink and white flowers were gently distilled into fragrant waters and infused into oils. Apothecaries prized this apple blossom water as a remedy for sore eyes and anxious minds, a soothing balm credited with calming the spirits. Perfumers used their subtle, sweet scent to create delicate fragrances, capturing the very essence of a spring orchard in a tiny glass bottle, and from the rough, rugged bark, tanners extracted rich tannins. These natural chemicals were essential for transforming raw, perishable animal hides into durable, supple leather. The bark was stripped from pruned branches, crushed and soaked in vast vats where it would work its alchemy on the hides, preserving them against rot and turning them into the shoes, belts and saddles that were the backbone of daily life. From its deep roots to its highest blossom, nothing from the apple tree was allowed to go to waste. It was a silent partner in every craft, a hidden ingredient in medicine and luxury, proving that its true value was not merely in the food it provided, but in the endless utility of its entire being. That same wood, so useful in the hands of craftsmen, was believed to hold a spirit of its own. Beyond the practical threats of law and blight, a deeper, more primal fear guarded the medieval orchard. Ancient folklore whispered that the oldest, most gnarled apple trees were not merely plants, but living gateways. A perfect circle of mushrooms, a fairy ring, growing at the base of a tree was not seen as a natural phenomenon. It was a portal to the other world, a place of powerful and often unpredictable beings. To disturb such a ring, or worse, to harm the tree it surrounded, was to invite a curse upon yourself and your entire family. These beliefs were not childish superstitions. They were a sophisticated form of supernatural security. Every creak of a branch in the wind was interpreted as the voice of a guardian spirit. The will-o'-the-wisp, a faint flickering light sometimes seen over swampy ground near orchards, was not marsh gas, but a malevolent fairy leading thieves astray to be lost forever. The orchard was a living entity, and its invisible guardians demanded respect. Specific deities from older, pre-Christian traditions were absorbed into this protective role. In Celtic regions, the goddess Pomona was not just a Roman name. She was a living presence believed to watch over the fruit. To take an apple without offering a prayer or a small token of thanks was a direct insult to her, an act that could cause the entire orchard to wither in revenge. This belief system created a powerful psychological barrier. A peasant might risk the Lord's justice for a stomach full of apples, but would he risk having his cows go dry, his children fall ill, or his soul be led astray by vengeful fairies? The supernatural deterrent was often far more effective than any human law. It transformed the act of theft from a simple crime into a spiritual transgression, making the orchard a place of awe as much as a source of food. The rustling leaves did not just speak of future cider. They whispered ancient warnings that kept the greedy at bay far more effectively than any wall. Within the silent scriptorium, a monk's quill scratched across vellum, capturing secrets more valuable than any prayer. These were the illuminated herbals and gardening manuals, and to the untrained eye, they were simply beautiful books of plants. But look closer, the vibrant illustration of an apple tree, its branches laden with golden fruit, was not just a picture, it was a precise botanical diagram. The exact angle at which a branch met the trunk could indicate the perfect cut for a successful graft. The number of leaves on a stem might correspond to the ideal number of buds to leave on a scion. This was knowledge encrypted in plain sight, a living library disguised as art. Why encode something as practical as how to grow a tree? Because this information was power. In a world where literacy was a rare key, these manuscripts were locked chests. A lord who could read the Latin text might learn that a certain apple was good for storage, but only a master grafter, trained by the monks, could decipher the hidden lesson in the painting itself, the subtle curve of a line that revealed how to bind the graft to prevent disease. The beauty of the page was a decoy, distracting from the profound technical data woven into its very design. A seemingly decorative border of intertwined vines could be a visual recipe for companion planting, showing which herbs, when grown at the base of an apple tree, would deter pests and enrich the soil. These books were less like instructions and more like a master's private journal, where the deepest truths were communicated through a shared visual language known only to the initiated. Turning a page was not just an act of reading, but of unlocking, each illuminated letter a tiny door to a world of living, breathing expertise. A wealthy merchant might boast a chest of gold, but a wise lord would trade it all for a single thriving orchard when the siege towers roll into view. Picture the castle gates sealed, the surrounding fields scorched. Inside the walls, the merchant can only listen to the hollow clink of his coins. They cannot be eaten. They cannot be drunk. His abstract wealth has become a cruel, useless weight. Meanwhile, the Lord walks his orchard. His trees are a living larder, their branches heavy with fruit that can be eaten fresh, dried for winter, or pressed into life-sustaining cider. His cellars are filled with barrels of last year's vintage and sacks of apples strung from the rafters. While the merchant starves surrounded by his gold, the Lord's people are fed, hydrated, and their morale sustained by the tangible, renewable wealth growing just inside the walls. The merchant's gold is a promise that the outside world can no longer keep. The Lord's apples are a promise kept by the land itself, day after day. This is the ultimate test of value. In a crisis, gold is merely a symbol, an apple is survival. The merchant has a fortune, but the Lord holds power, because true power is the ability to sustain life when everything else fails. That orchard was not just an asset on a ledger, it was a deep-rooted faith in the land's ability to provide, a belief system that would eventually inspire a new kind of quest, one that sent explorers sailing toward the edge of the known world. An orchard's value was so immense it dictated the very stones of a castle. Walk the grounds of any great medieval fortress or manor, and you will find the landscape itself was engineered around the fruit trees. This was not haphazard planting, it was strategic architecture. The most prized orchards were almost always enclosed within high, protective walls, creating what was known as a pleasance or a walled garden. These walls served a dual purpose. They were a physical barrier against thieves and stray animals, and they created a unique microclimate. Sunlight would warm the stone by day, releasing that heat slowly through the cool night, shielding the delicate blossoms from a late frost that could decimate an entire year's harvest. The layout was a masterclass in efficiency. Trees were planted in orderly rows, not for aesthetics alone, but to allow sun to reach every branch and to let the Lord or his Pomarius walk between them for easy inspection. Can you see the deliberate design? The castle's main living quarters, the great hall and the solar, were often positioned to have a commanding view over this enclosed paradise. A lord could look out from his window and survey his living treasury, a direct visual representation of his power and prosperity. This was landscape architecture as a statement of control. A barren fortress was a symbol of brute force, but a castle surrounded by a thriving, productive orchard was a symbol of enduring, civilized power. It demonstrated an ability to command not just men, but nature itself, creating a self-sufficient world where beauty and necessity were grafted together as seamlessly as the branches on the trees. That same sensory world of sharp ciders and savory pies is not entirely lost to time. Modern historians and brewers have ventured into a fascinating kind of culinary archaeology, attempting to recreate the exact flavors a medieval lord would have known. The results are a shock to the modern palate, used to uniform sweetness. A cider fermented from true heirloom apples like the foxwhelp is not a sweet, bubbly drink. It is a complex, almost wine-like beverage, startlingly tart and tannic, with a funky, earthy depth that speaks of oak barrels and cold cellars. This was a drink with backbone, meant to be pondered, not gulped. In the kitchen, the most revolutionary rediscovery has been verjuice. Forget lemon juice or vinegar. This is something else entirely. Made from the intense, unripe juice of crab apples or wildlings, verjuice adds a bright, sharp greenness to sauces and stews, a clean acidity that cuts through the richness of roasted meats without overpowering them. It is the secret ingredient that makes a medieval dish taste authentically medieval. And then there are the pies. Imagine a thick, sturdy crust, not as a flaky dessert vessel, but as a durable container, a literal cooking pot made of dough. Inside, you would not find just sweetened apples, but a hearty mixture of meat, onions, spices like saffron and ginger, and chunks of sharp cooking apples like the costard. The fruit was not the star, but a supporting player that provided a subtle sweetness and a wonderful texture, thickening the savory gravy as it baked. To taste these recreations is to understand the medieval palate. It was a world of bold contrast and practical ingenuity, where every ingredient, especially the apple, served multiple purposes. This tangible experience bridges the gap of centuries, turning abstract historical value into a flavor you can truly savor, a direct connection to the lives sustained by those gnarled, priceless trees. The rustling leaves of the orchard could mask the footsteps of a desperate man, but they could not hide the crime of stealing a lord's livelihood. In the year 1324, an English court recorded the case of John Atewell, who was caught sawing a branch from a prized apple tree on his landlord's estate. He was not after the fruit, he was after the scion wood itself, the very genetic key to propagating that valuable variety. The court did not treat this as simple trespass. John was convicted of malicious destruction, a crime against the future, and his punishment was a fine so heavy it amounted to more than a year's wages for a common laborer. He lost his savings, his standing, and very nearly his freedom. This was the harsh reality of the medieval legal system. An act we might dismiss as minor vandalism was, in their eyes, an act of economic sabotage. To illegally graft a branch was to steal a potential river of cider and bushels of future harvests. It was a theft of time itself, robbing the community of wealth that would not mature for a decade. Can you comprehend the fear such a judgment instilled? Your neighbor's envy could cost you everything. Even more brutal was the crime of orchard arson. In the chronicles of a French monastery, a grim tale is told of a disgruntled tenant who, in a fit of rage, set fire to his lord's apple grove. The flames did not just consume wood and leaf, they consumed the financial security of the entire estate for a generation. The court's records describe the punishment with chilling simplicity. The arsonist was hanged, not for murder, but for destroying the primary source of his lord's income and the community's sustenance. His life was deemed a fair price for the lost trees. This was the orchard's shadow, the dark side of its immense value. The law protected these living assets with a ferocity reserved for the most serious crimes because their loss was not a temporary inconvenience. It was a sentence of poverty and hunger for everyone who depended on them. Every stolen apple was a tiny tear in the social fabric, and every felled tree was a wound to the body politic, punished with a severity meant to echo the damage done. That gnarled solitary apple tree in an old churchyard is not just a tree, it is a living fossil, the last survivor of a forgotten orchard planted by monks centuries ago. These ancient trees, often hollowed by time but still stubbornly bearing fruit, are direct descendants of the medieval groves we have been exploring. The churchyard was sacred ground, a protected space where these vital food sources could grow undisturbed, feeding the clergy and offering charity to the poor. When you see one, you are looking at a biological relic, a piece of living history that has witnessed generations come and go, but the ghosts of these orchards are written into the land itself. Walk through the English countryside and you might see a gentle, wavy pattern in a field, like corduroy cloth stretched over the earth. This is ridge and furrow, the signature of medieval open-field farming. These ridges were created by centuries of plows turning the soil inward, and the raised strips provided the perfect, well-drained ground for fruit trees planted along their crests. That subtle undulation is the land's memory of a time when every inch of soil was organized for community survival. Can you feel the history under your feet? The most common clues, however, are woven into the names on our maps. Any town, village, or lane with Appleby, Appleton, or Appuldrum in its name carries the Old English word for apple tree, Epelton, meaning the orchard or the apple enclosure. These are not whimsical labels, they are permanent records telling you that this very place was once renowned for its thriving apple groves. A street named Pomona Rise or a farm called Cider Press continues this tradition, a direct linguistic link to the economic powerhouse that once stood there. To find a medieval orchard, you do not always need to dig. Sometimes you only need to look at a map or glance across a field at a single twisted tree standing sentinel over the grass. It is a treasure hunt where the prize is a connection to a world where value grew on trees, a world whose roots still cling to our own. Gold could fill a chest, but it could never fill a stomach. The medieval apple orchard's supreme value was not a single quality, but a perfect fusion of necessity and meaning. Economically, it was a renewable mint, producing a currency of fruit and cider that funded kingdoms and paid rents. Nutritionally, it was a winter lifeline, a source of vital vitamins when the land was barren. Medically, its flesh healed wounds and its cider purified water, standing between life and death. Spiritually, it was a sacred grove, a living symbol of paradise and immortality that commanded both divine reverence and supernatural fear. And socially, it was the heart of the community, the cider cellar where news was shared and alliances were forged. All these strands wove together into an unbreakable cord of dependence and reverence. A hoard of gold was a static, fleeting prize, but a thriving orchard was life itself, resilient, regenerative, and deeply rooted. It teaches us a timeless lesson that the most profound wealth is not always something you can lock away. True value is alive, breathing, and capable of nurturing the future with every passing season.